Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want you to imagine that the NFL team nearest you, or the NFL team that you are interested in, or maybe you're not a big football fan, but you can just use your imagination. But let's say that it's an NFL game and that after the game, the coach has his mini press conference. And during that press conference, one of the reporters asks the coach of the team, well, how do you feel about the fact that your quarterback threw 4 interceptions, especially that one right near the end of the game that lost the game for your team? Well, you probably already know how the coach is going to respond to that question. He's going to say something along the lines of, well, I'm the coach and I take full responsibility for that. And I just need to really get the guys ready to play. And our coordinators need to, not put him in that situation. And, we need to scheme up something better on offense and so on and so forth. So we know that he's not going to throw his quarterback under the bus in that press conference. Now, he is very likely going to have a conversation with his quarterback in private and talk about decision making and, things of that nature. But, we've seen it before many, many times. A coach is going to praise their athletes. They're going to take responsibility for the loss. And then very likely in private, they're going to deal with the situation. And here's the thing. That is a characteristic of great leadership, to accept responsibility even when it's not your fault. And a characteristic of poor leadership is to play the blame game. Sometimes I like to say it's when you get out your blame thrower and, getting defensive and throwing people under the bus. Those are characteristics of poor leadership. And, why does this happen? Well, I think it happens for 2 reasons. One is because it's very difficult to take responsibility, and it's very easy to blame everybody else. And so on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we're going to answer the question, at your school, who gets the credit and who takes the blame? But before we jump into that subject, I have a free resource for you, and it's called the Top 6 Ways to Protect Your School from a Lawsuit. And this is a 10-page PDF that will help you to keep your staff and students safe and help keep your school out of court. Litigation is expensive and time-consuming and extremely stressful, and this common sense guide can help you be more intentional and proactive when it comes to protecting your school. And you can grab the top 6 ways to protect your school from a lawsuit at theprivateschoolleader.com/lawsuit. Again, that free guide for you is available over at theprivateschoolleader.com/lawsuit. And then a quick question for you. What's your biggest problem at school right now? What is it that you're dealing with? Maybe it's parents. Maybe it's a difficult teacher. Maybe it's something to do with facilities. Maybe it's something to do with retention and recruitment. What's your biggest challenge right now? What's the biggest problem? Well, one-on-one coaching is all about helping you solve that problem. And it's also all about helping you to have a transformation wherever you are in your current state, to help you get clear on what you want and where you could be as a private school leader, as a parent, as a spouse or partner, as a person. You can't if you could get those things for free, and maybe you can, with all the free content that's out there, but if you want to take that next step and work with me one-on-one and get that transformation in your life and work together to solve your biggest problem at school right now, then head over to theprivateschoolleader.com/coaching and check it out. So we're talking about who, on this episode of the podcast, we're talking about who gets the credit and who takes the blame. And so I want to just talk for a moment about the importance of taking responsibility and how that helps with your bedrock of integrity in your leadership at your school. Because it's a fundamental truth that great leaders take responsibility. And great leaders take responsibility even when it's not their fault. This isn't about whose fault it is. It's about the fact that as the school leader, you're the face of the institution. You're the one who is the leader. And when things go right, you should highlight the work of your team and give them credit. And when things go wrong, it's your role to step forward and just own that situation. And that is very, very difficult, and it can lead to a lot of internal feelings about, but I'm not the one who did that. And I'm here to tell you it's hard, but it's our responsibility to step up and to take responsibility and to lead in that way. So I want to tell you 3 reasons why this is so important, and then I'm going to talk about why some leaders blame others rather than take responsibility, and then I'm going to give you 7 strategies for effective leadership with regards to taking the blame and giving credit. Now, I know what I just said sounded like a lot, and as usual, I will take good care of you in the show notes. Those will be at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 111. And, again, I always encourage you to do something else while you're listening to the podcast. You're so busy. And if you can take in this content while you're walking the dog or working out or running errands or driving to or from school, then maybe later, if there's something you want to go back to, you can check it out in the show notes. So what are 3 reasons why this is so important? Who gets the credit and who takes the blame? Why is that so important? Well, reason number 1 is because it builds trust. I've talked about this before. I actually just talked about it last week in episode 110, that trust and honesty and integrity is the foundation of leadership. And when you take responsibility for your mistakes, that's huge, okay? But it's even bigger when you take responsibility for mistakes in the organization or for other people's mistakes. And even when it's not entirely your fault, you're showing your team that you are going to be accountable as the leader and that you're trustworthy. And there are a few things that build trust more than stepping up and taking responsibility and holding yourself accountable and apologizing and not throwing people under the bus. So the reasons why this is so important, number 1 is building trust. Number 2 is empowering others. So when you give credit to your staff when things go well, you're empowering them, and it's great for boosting morale. And honestly, this encourages your teachers to take initiative and I think they feel more valued for the things that they contribute for their hard work. And it really helps to empower your teachers. And then the 3rd reason why this is so important is because you are actually modeling integrity. Our teachers, they tend to do what we do. So if we're showing up late 3 out of 5 days, we're giving them permission to show up late. If we have an unpredictable mood and we get angry and just every once in a while kind of pop off in a meeting and let somebody have it, then we're giving them permission and modeling that that's okay. That's an okay way to treat other people at our school. So what we model, that's what they follow. That's what they do. And so with your staff and your students and even the parents of the school, they're watching how you handle situations. And if you take the blame and give credit, that just sets an example, not only of accountability and responsibility, but also of humility. I'm telling you, the Venn diagram does not overlap very much or at all when it comes to a leader that doesn't take responsibility and the word humility. When the leader has arrogance and insecurities and and conceit and is a positional leader, that's the kind of leader that does not display humility and is going to throw people under the bus and is going to get defensive and is not going to take responsibility. And so, it's just a reminder that what we're modeling is that taking the blame, giving credit to others when they succeed, it's all about setting that example. Humility, integrity, selflessness, those keys for being a great leader and for building that trust and building those relationships. So why do some leaders blame others rather than take responsibility? When we look back over our time as a leader, no matter how long it's been, of course there have been times where we have not stepped up and taken responsibility. So why does that happen to us, or why are some leaders just so prone to that? Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is fear of failure. We all have a fear of failure. And when something goes wrong, we don't want to attach our name to that. Then we look like the failure. Another reason is lack of self-awareness. I think that some leaders do this and aren't really fully aware that they're doing it. It's just like a defense mechanism. Most defense mechanisms are reflexive, and we're not really thinking through what we're doing. We just do it. And that's even worse, because then that's a pattern. It's not situational as much as it's a habit. It's a pattern of what we do. So a lack of self-awareness. Another reason why sometimes we don't take responsibility is just insecurity and imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is all about that when bad things happen, when good things happen, it's luck, and when bad things happen, it's proof. And so we don't want those bad things to be attached to us. And then that leads to the next reason why sometimes leaders don't take responsibility, and that's reputation. We want to have a good reputation. We want to be perceived as a good leader or popular or well-liked or whatever. And when something goes wrong, we don't want that attached to our reputation. Another reason could be a need for control. Some of us have more of a need for control than others. And I believe that leaders who tend more towards wanting control and micromanaging, that they are less likely to take responsibility when things go wrong, because they're super clear on who's responsible for what. And it's really hard to not to know that, and then to not shine the light on people who, well, you were responsible for this part of the project and that didn't happen. And so then the final reason, and I have this in all caps in my notes, is when we're under a lot of stress and under a lot of pressure, that's a lot of the reason when we don't take responsibility and when we do get out our blame thrower. We're under a lot of stress. We're under a lot of pressure. And when we don't meet a goal, if we're at a board meeting, see, here's the other thing. It's one thing to stand up in front of your teachers at a meeting and take responsibility for something. But what about when you're at a board meeting and the teachers aren't in the room, or your admission director isn't in the room, and you're under a lot of pressure to meet certain goals for enrollment or certain test scores or, things of that nature, it's pretty hard to accept responsibility and to not blame others, especially when they're not there and especially when we're under stress. And so, integrity doesn't take a time out when we're no longer in the presence of others. In fact, integrity, many people, we've seen that definition where integrity is how we act when no one is watching. So I think that these are a lot of the reasons why we don't take responsibility and why we like to blame others, or I don't want to say we like to blame others, but sometimes we resort to blaming others. Fear of failure, lack of self-awareness, insecurity, imposter syndrome, protecting our reputation, and need for control, and we're under a lot of stress. So all of those are really, really valid things, and they happen. But what we want to do is kind of pause and take that step outside of ourselves and be curious observers of the way that we behave and the way that we act when it comes to this specific issue. And we're going to step up like we always do on this podcast, okay? So here are the 7 strategies for effective leadership with regards to who gets the credit and who takes the blame. So I'll just run through them and then we'll take them one by one. And like I said, they'll be there for you in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com, episode 111. So here they are. Number 1, publicly take responsibility for mistakes. Number 2, give credit to your team publicly. These are the strategies that we're going to follow. Number 3, coach and correct in private. Number 4, be transparent. Number 5, own decisions even when they are delegated. Number 6, model accountability daily. And number 7, celebrate team success without taking credit. Now, those sound pretty straightforward. Sure they are. There's a lot of things about leadership that are straightforward, but they're not easy. So just one last thing before we start with number 1 here, and that is I wanted to remind you about episode 42, and it's called Extreme Ownership, Leadership Lessons from a Navy SEAL. And I'm going to link that for you in the show notes, and that is kind of along the lines of what we're talking about, and it's through the lens of the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, and their experience in Ramadi during the war. And Extreme Ownership, Leadership Lessons from a Navy SEAL, episode 42, will be a good companion episode for today's episode. So I'll link that in the show notes. Okay, number 1, we're going to publicly take responsibility for mistakes. So when something goes wrong, whether it's a decision that we made and it didn't really work out, or a policy that receives some pushback and some backlash, or an issue with a student and you decided a certain way to handle it and it didn't work out. You decided to take that student, or you decided to keep that student instead of expel them, or just whatever the case might be. It is absolutely essential that we take responsibility as the leader. Publicly take responsibility for mistakes. We all make mistakes. The team knows that we made the mistake. If we don't take responsibility and we use evasive language and we try to, make excuses and get defensive, that is not good leadership, and they see it, and it's a really bad look, and it erodes trust. But what we can do in those situations, it's not easy, but what we can do is just take responsibility and apologize, and then just say that you're going to work hard to make it better or to do better next time. And here's the other thing. If you want to talk about gossip, if you want to talk about people talking about you behind your back, if everyone knows that you messed up and you get defensive or you blame others or you get evasive and you don't take responsibility, that's when you're like pouring gasoline on the conversations, pouring gasoline on the fire of those conversations that are happening in the teacher workroom or in the teacher group text. But the thing that just deflates that and ends it and they move on to the next thing is when you apologize and take responsibility and just say that you're going to work harder to make it better or work harder so that it doesn't happen next time. And I want to tell you something. Early in my career, probably the first 12 years of my career, I rarely took responsibility. I made excuses. I was defensive. It was very rare for me to apologize, and it's because I was a very insecure leader as a young leader early in my career. And it wasn't a good look. And so as I got more into my career and more experienced and more confident, then I started to do that. But so my point in bringing that up is that I've had a portion of my career, at least probably about a third of my career, where I was living in that zone of blaming and not taking responsibility and being evasive and making excuses and getting defensive. So I know how that went. It didn't go well. And everybody knew that I messed up, and everyone knew that it was my responsibility and knew it was my fault. But then for 2/3 of my career, I've tried to take, I'm not saying I'm perfect, I'm not saying I've done it every time, but more often, much more often, I try to take responsibility and apologize. It diffuses all that talk, and it builds trust, and it builds confidence, and it builds morale, and it builds a better relationship with your team. So number one is to publicly take responsibility for mistakes. And number two is to give credit to your team publicly. So, when your teachers or the school achieve something positive, let's say it's academic success with, test scores, or it's a really successful event like back to school night or grandparents' day, or it's some sort of improvement in the school culture, or maybe it's the self-study for accreditation. Everyone worked really hard and got turned in ahead of the deadline. We have to give credit where credit is due. And these teachers, they work really hard. And I'm not trying to say that every teacher in your school is perfect or that every teacher in your school works really, really hard, but almost all of them do. And so when we're in staff meetings or, the places where we can give credit, we can give it publicly in a staff meeting or at an all-school assembly, or an all-school religious service if you're a religious school. In the school newsletter, we can highlight what happened. It can be the daily memo or the weekly memo or the parent memo. There are a lot of places where we can shout out people, morning announcements, to celebrate their success and give them those shout outs that they've earned. And so that they know that their hard work is appreciated, and it builds morale, and it strengthens your team, and it encourages continued dedication, and it encourages them to have a lens through which they start shouting out others. Is that something that you want at your school? Well, you can set the example by being the one that is giving credit to the team in general, or team members in particular. Give credit to your teachers. They work hard. When things are worthy of recognition, we need to recognize them. All right, so that brings us to number 3 on our list of 7 strategies for effective leadership with regards to taking the blame and giving credit. So number 3 is to coach and correct in private. And so this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the NFL coach and the quarterback that threw 4 interceptions. When one of your teachers messes up and they make a mistake and they need guidance and maybe they're embarrassed, it is so important to handle those conversations privately, because publicly correcting them, publicly pointing it out, shining that light on them, publicly blaming them, like I said, getting out your blame thrower, that just is embarrassing and it damages trust. And so let's say it's a teacher that needs improvement in their area in the area of classroom management. Okay, well, you're not going to call them out in front of even one other colleague. You're going to talk to them one-on-one. You're going to discuss this. You're going to give suggestions. You're going to support them. You're going to maybe either yourself or get someone else to model a lesson. Maybe you're going to give them, a copy of Harry Wong's book, The First Days of School. I'll link that in the show notes. I think that is the Bible, quote unquote, of effective classroom management. You're going to do it in private. And when you're in private, it allows you to be more honest. It allows you to be constructive. It takes some of the emotion out of it. I'm not saying that there's no emotion there, because they're going to feel defensive. You're going to feel stressed, but you can preserve the dignity of that teacher and respect that teacher by having that conversation in private. So we accept the responsibility publicly, and then we do our coaching and correcting in private. All right, and then number 4 on our list is to just be transparent. And again, transparency, we hear a lot about that. I think that there's even more in our schools. There's more of a focus on that, because generally in the corporate world, in the political world, in local and state and federal government, that there just seems to be more and more of a lack of transparency. And so this has become a really important issue for people in general, for our teachers in particular. And so we just want to be upfront and about what happened. We can't share everything necessarily, especially if it's a staff issue, a personnel issue. Sometimes we can't really share much of anything. But what we can share, we should share, and be transparent. And, if there's an issue that comes up, we need to just be clear with the teachers, or maybe it's an email to the parents, depending on the situation. And it's like, okay, such and such happened, and maybe you can't really say too much about what happened, but you can say, this is a priority for us, that we're going to take this seriously. Here are the 3 steps that we're going to take to address it. If you would like to discuss this further, please, reach out by email. Just addressing it, taking it on. I think so many of us, we're worried about the blowback. We're worried about the negative feedback and whatever, and then we kind of like kick the can down the road as far as like the communication and the transparency, and all that does is make people think that we're hiding something, and then the rumor mill starts going, and then we have to get into like reaction mode and spin control and PR, managing the PR aspect of it, when if we can just quickly and intelligently and communicate in a way that just builds credibility and just reassures the teachers or the parents that you've got this, and that you're handling this responsibility, you're handling it responsibly, and that you're accountable. So transparency, and then communicating that. That brings us to number 5, and that is to own your decisions even when they're delegated. And this is tough. Okay, this is really tough, because it's super clear to you who messed up. You make a decision, you delegate it to others, but ultimately you are responsible for that outcome. The coach of that NFL team has an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. And if that defensive coordinator came up with a game plan and that game plan didn't work, in that post-game press conference, that coach can't throw the defensive coordinator under the bus. He's going to have a conversation or two later, but when things are clearly delegated, when something goes wrong, there's even more of a temptation to blame that person, because it's super clear who it is that messed up. But it's super important that we don't blame that person publicly. So let's say that someone at your school is is responsible for planning an event. And let's just say that event was pretty disorganized and didn't really go well, and the registration materials weren't there, and the coffee was cold, and there wasn't enough food, and there weren't enough chairs, and just, like, it didn't go well. Okay. Well, the next, leadership meeting that you have, you're debriefing and this event, and everybody sitting there knows that who's responsible, but you can take responsibility and be like, okay, I'm gonna, we're gonna have a better event next year. I own this, and we will work. We're gonna take the feedback, but we're gonna focus on what we can do better, and we're gonna move forward. So own the decisions even when they're delegated, and that kind of goes back to that extreme ownership that I mentioned that's in that episode that I'll link in the show notes. All right, we're almost there. 2 more quick ones. Model accountability daily is number 6. And again, that's hard to do for all the reasons I listed at the top of the episode. But, accountability isn't just about handling like the big issues in the school, the big noticeable issues in the school. It's about being consistent every single day in how you handle situations, because, being accountable and taking responsibility, this isn't like something that you do every now and then. It's just like a way of life. It's a characteristic of your leadership. And if you make a small mistake in a meeting, let's say like giving incorrect information, just correct yourself immediately and show that even small mistakes matter. This really sets a strong example for your teachers. Again, it displays integrity, and it shows that you're taking responsibility in the little things and in the big things. Not just the big grand sweeping gestures when it's something big that is a really huge issue that, the self-study is not done and it's 2 weeks past the deadline, or there was some major thing about, the campus facilities issue, the parking lot was not plowed, and someone slipped and fell on their way into the school. All right, it's pretty easy to blame the guy that didn't show up with his team to plow the parking lot, but it's like we have to be in this mode of, instead of blaming, taking responsibility. And then that brings us to number 7 on our list of strategies, and that is to celebrate team successes without taking credit. I used to have this all backwards early in my career. For the leader, it's really about shining that spotlight on the teachers, on your leadership team, on your kitchen staff, your office staff, your bus drivers, your coaches, your team members, the maintenance staff, the custodians. As leaders, we're in the background. We're leading from behind, that servant leadership. The shepherd kind of guides the sheep. When your teachers accomplish something great, you need to resist the urge to claim too much credit. And I would say resist the urge to claim any credit, even if you played a big role in front or behind the scenes. If your school's standardized test scores go up, celebrate the teachers and the students who made it happen, and just highlight that work that everyone put into and celebrate it. And what it does is it builds a culture of shared success, because we've probably worked for people, or we've seen people, whether it's on TV or actors portraying leaders in movies or whatever, when the team accomplishes something and then the leader steps up and takes credit for it, and that is just the cringiest thing, and it feels like crap for people who did the hard work and then the leaders taking the credit. So this is probably a no-brainer for you, but I think it bears mentioning anyways, that we want to build a culture of shared success where every teacher, every team member, they feel like their contribution is valued and recognized. And one of the ways we can assure that is that when great things happen, we're not taking the credit for it. So what did we learn today? Well, we talked about 3 reasons why it's so important to take extreme ownership, to take responsibility, to take the blame, and to give credit to others. But also, if there's something that needs to be corrected, we want to do it in private. And 3 reasons why it's so important to lead in this way is, number 1, it builds trust. Number 2, it empowers others. And number 3, it models integrity. And then our 7 strategies for effective leadership with regards to taking the blame and giving credit. Number 1, we're going to publicly take responsibility for our mistakes. Number 2, we're going to publicly give credit to our team. Number 3, we're going to coach and correct in private. Number 4, be transparent. Number 5, own decisions even when they are delegated. Number 6, model accountability daily in the big things and the small things. And then number 7 is to celebrate the success of our teachers and our team without taking credit. And your call to action for today's episode is that the next time that you have the urge to blame someone publicly for a mistake, just pause, take responsibility publicly, and then discuss it in private. I know a lot easier said than done, but you are very much able to do this, and it's that pause that is the big thing. Just have to pause before we react and start to blame and play that blame game. So I want to give you another free gift as we wrap up the episode today, and this one's called 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. And we know that working with parents is part of the job, and most of our parents are great, but some of them can be pretty demanding and emotional and difficult. And this guide will give you the tools you need to build better relationships and have better meetings with the difficult parents at your school. So if you go to theprivateschoolleader.com/parents, you can grab this free guide called the 5 Strategies to Help You Work with Difficult Parents. And that's just going over to theprivateschoolleader.com/parents, and you can get that for free. And the last thing I want to mention is just a reminder that if you want to go from being in survival mode and feeling like, do I want to keep doing this? This is so hard. I feel exhausted and overwhelmed and stressed out, and my family just is getting what's left of me at the end of the day, and this is just not sustainable. If any of that resonates with you right now, then I urge you to check out theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive, because Thrive Academy is an online course that can take you step by step, strategy by strategy, from where you are to that ultimate goal of having a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And so I want to help you go step by step to get there. And you can check that out at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. And just a reminder that I love the feedback. We've gotten some great reviews lately on Apple Podcasts. Wherever you listen, if you would just take the time, take a few minutes to write a review and rate the podcast. I love the feedback. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, it helps the algorithm push this podcast out as suggested content to private school leaders all over the world. We're trying to get the word out, and one of the ways to do that, the most important way to do that, is to just take the link from today's episode and share it with another leader in your life or an aspiring leader at your school. I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing at your school for your lucky teachers and your lucky kids. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your week to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.